Okay, so to start off with, I want to just go briefly over 3D transformations and how they work. This is all running in the browser. So what we can do now is we can translate elements, and we have 3 axes now, so X, Y, and Z. So it's the Z that's quite interesting that we have that now in websites. And the same thing, we can rotate around all the axes. And then for the 3D part, we have transform style. That just, if you set that on some element in your web page, it says like all the children want 3D, want to be displayed in 3D. We can set perspective. It's kind of just like the distance from the camera, like you see there. And we can also choose where the vanishing point should be. I made a small sample, so a Redgate demo to show you different pieces of both 3D transforms and animations. And based on some recent discussion within the company, I decided to do so I have just really simple markup, but I have span for each letter, so I can individually animate each letter. And there are 2 ways to animate in CSS. One is using transition, and the other one is using animation. Animation is basically keyframes animation, so you can just from the beginning and to the end and have many steps on the way, configure exactly how the element should be translated. Or you can say transition, and that just says every time this property changes, animate it over this amount of time. And then you can also add easing functions and extra stuff. But here I'm setting a transition for every letter. So every time I transform it, it takes 1 second to kind of animate between the different states. So if we look at the first letter there, R, the only thing I do is when I add the animate class, so when I click the document, I add animate class to the H1. So when that's added, I just translate it 160 pixels on the X axis. So if you look at the R here, that just moves along the X axis. The D, that's however rotating around the Y axis. And I set the transform origin to 50% and minus 25. So I'm basically, instead of being rotating around itself, I'm making it rotating around the E. So if you want to see that again, it just goes here and turns into a B. The G uses animation, and then we need to define the keyframe separately, and we can reuse the animations on many elements. Here I'm just saying, okay, take 1 second, use the spin G animation definition, and forwards means that when you're done animating, stay in that position. The default thing is to just animate and then go back to the position it was in before. And there, just start 0 degrees, rotate 180 and go up, and then take a full circle back. So that's a G here. And you see like it got the smooth animation, but when I take the class off, it just falls back into the place. It's because the animation is only applied while the CSS style is active. So if I just take the class off, then this is no longer active. It just goes back to the original state, just like CSS works. So the A and T, they kind of scale down and then go up again. And that's similar to before. You just start by scaling 1.2 of its size, goes to 1.2 and then back to 1, so it kind of comes a little bit up and back down. And then the last one is the E. The E, it's quite simple. It just goes here back on the X and then it spins. And that is defined here. So it basically uses just the same as the R. Same as the R. It just translates on the X-axis. And then we have an animation. And the animation takes 200 milliseconds, but it waits for 1 second before it starts. So it lets it slide the X-axis, then the animation starts, and it just spins. It uses linear easing. The default easing is kind of ease out, ease in, out. And the 3 set tells it to spin 3 times. The cool thing about the duration is also that you can have negative values in the duration, and that means start in the middle of the animation. So for example, if we would move this across the screen, we can say, okay, move it across the screen and do that forever, but start in the middle. And it starts, then you would use like a negative delay to start in the middle, and then it would just go over and over again over the screen. So that's it. Be great. But I have a few more demos. For the animation and the transition, we can set all kinds of easings. Most popular are just linear or ease in, but you can also set a cubic Bezier curve, and then you just basically can change the control points, and you can get kind of this smooth, nice easing. SQL Monitor is using 3D transforms now with animation. So when you come into the demo, it kind of, the whole page goes in 3D mode. But you see that this message here is not in 3D. So we have just a wrapper around the page that's kind of rotated into the 3D space. And this is just an absolute position diff. The cool thing though is that the page still works. So I can just go here and drill in. And we also used transformations here. So when I scroll down, this header here, it's kind of bad on the presenter, but kind of scales up and scales down. This is maybe a more advanced demo. This is CSS. So this is kind of, don't do this. But yeah, if you're dedicated, you can do complex stuff. If you're gonna go more into CSS3 and try stuff, I recommend using Modernizer to feature detect. So like here we can say, okay, I want to feature detect animations, 3D transformations, and you can take here to add CSS classes to the HTML element. Then in your CSS, you can just have in front of your selector CSS transitions and do your transitions, and then no CSS transitions and style it then for the older browsers. And one of the headaches you get when you start doing this are the vendor prefixes. If you want to support every browser, it's like, okay, you have to know if you use WebKit, Morse, MS, some prefixes, because it's the browser that implement those features before they become a standard, so it's kind of for you to experiment with. You kind of don't want to do that. Please try to just use the standard and use some tool to generate the prefixes for you. Auto prefixer is pretty nice because that's based off popularity of the browsers. So if we see down here somewhere, oh, did I go? Come on, it was somewhere here. Here. So you can just configure what browsers you want to support. So you can just say, okay, I'm just gonna use the last 2 versions of every browser, and then it detects which browser needs what prefix and adds that for you. And if you want IE7, you can configure that, and then you would get more CSS output to support that browsers. And yeah, a lot of configurations. Okay. So any questions? Yeah.
So when you remove the classes in the Redgate degrade demo, some of the letters have an animation when they go back to Redgate. What's the difference? Where's the distinction?
So the ones that are using animations don't go back, but the ones that are using transitions go back. That's because, like up here, each letter has this. That's just always when you change the transform of any letter, animate it for 1 second. So, like here for the R, when it has the animate class, it changes the position. And when it takes this animate class off, then it goes back to 0 there, so it animates back because this is still applied. But for the animation is only applied when the animate class is on, but when you take it off, just the animation like disappears. So it just falls directly back to what was there before.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Okay.
Is there an easy way to just implement the reverse animation, or would I have to do that manually?
For animation, you would probably need to have kind of swap for a different class and activate a different animation, but you can use the same keyframes and just add the reverse in the animation definition. Then it kind of plays the same keyframe, but reverse. So, okay.
Got 4 talks to get through, so if anyone's any questions for IE, then grab them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.